2, we're going to be thinking about how we think. And I know that's a tough thing to start with in the morning on a Friday, particularly after you've had, I think, probably your first full 5 days. Yeah. One of the things that you'll note that we discussed the other day, which feels like a really long time ago now, to be honest, might just be the number of Thursdays that we had, was we talked about something called cause and effect. And at the time, I couldn't remember what the Latin phrase was with regards to the error that comes up when you get confused about cause and effect. So, as luck would have it, we have found a pop culture reference, which is this one. I say we. This is one I found a while back. So we'll have a quick look at this. And hopefully you will understand what it is I am referring to. One of my favorite TV shows, a dramatization called The West Wing. Those of you who have seen it. All right, and I'll try and make the sound.
Good morning, everyone. We got 143 since stage committee. I heard. The Ryder Cup team is declining our invitation to come to the White House. It's a joke. I'm not. The Ryder Cup team. It's a good club for the small person. I know what the Ryder Cup team is. Thanks. So this may be a good time to talk about it. I got an intelligence briefing.
Possibly.
Morning, everyone. We got 143 from stage committee. I heard. The Ryder Cup team is declining our invitation to come to the White House. I'm not. The Ryder Cup team. It's a good time for the small person. I know what the Ryder Cup team is. Thanks. But this may be a good time to talk about it. I got an intelligence briefing. Security briefing in 90 minutes. My different room will still be 3:45. Good time to talk about my second meeting. No. What else? It's just not the first time it's happened. I know. I know. You were saying that you asked somebody more than campaigns and you said it's because you don't look good in funny hats. It's big hats. It makes a difference. Well, if you don't want to, right? You don't want to be primary and you don't want to be general. And it wasn't real. So, TJ and the Eastern Generation post-hoc every what is your lawyers in the room? Anybody know who's hot here? Go after hot, John? First, after hot, therefore something else hot. And here next, I got more credit on the program. After, therefore, because. After, therefore, because. Meaning, one thing follows the other, therefore, it's called like that. But it's not always true. In fact, it's hardly ever. It's not really Texas. You know when you
All right, so pop culture, which this is, referencing the idea that there is this clash between cause and effect, that most people, when they see an effect of something, they make an assumption as to what the cause was. Yeah. Now, I thought that might be a bit obscure, and it is, isn't it just pleasant to see an intelligent president, even if it is an actor. By the way, the actor in the TV show, he actually acts as this character, and he has an economics degree. Just saying. President with an economics degree, that would be good.
Hi, Mom. No, I told you I'd call you when I got home. I'm not home yet. All right, I'm home. The Arctic expedition was a remarkable success. I'm all but certain there's a Nobel Prize in my future. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I'm entirely certain. No, Mother, I could not feel your church group praying for my safety. The fact that I'm homesick does not prove that it worked. That logic is post hoc ergo propter hoc. No, I'm not fastening you in Eskimo talk.
All right. Right. Another example, pop culture using the idea of post hoc ergo propter hoc. The idea that causes don't necessarily give you the effects that you think. Right? Or the effects that you think aren't necessarily caused by what you think causes them. So now what we're going to do is we're going to jump back into our Nearpod that we were working on the other day. So the code's going to come up on the screen again. For those of you who have forgotten it, you check. Okay. ID. Okay. All right. So it's nearpod.com. And then it will ask you to register. There is the code to register for the lesson. And this screen will take over your screen as it did before, and we will progress our way through. All the time, questions, etc., will appear, different activities for you to do. All right. Now, this is all building to give you the critical thinking skills that you will need for actually thinking about how we think, all right, and why we do. And yes, there is the potential that we could end up with an exam question that asks you about logic and the patterns, etc., of it. Now, I've gotten 9 registered so far. Some of you seem to be leaping already into it somehow. Okay. Yes, you can. You can start now, right, doing the matching pairs to review what you did the other day. I am going to skip past one of the next ones just so that we can keep going. All right, should be a whole lot faster now. You know much quicker and easier how the things work, what the terms mean. Apparently, grouper season is over. All right, so what you're doing is you're matching the pairs. All right, so you did this the other day, so it should be really quick. Which is a positive statement, which is a normative statement. Yep, okay, hold on a sec, I'll get the code. M-O-H-Z-I. That one. M-O-H-Z-I. It's interesting because what you can also do with this, and I did this with the year 10s the other day, is you can do like timing tests with it and set time limits for it. And it also, as you see, tells you how many tries. I know. It tells you how many tries, etc., and you can also set it to a timer. So these sorts of little activities are quite good as revision. So you can come up with ones perhaps yourself, like similar ideas, just checking your terminology and your understanding of the words and concepts. Right. Now, we discussed this idea the other day, positive and normative. We talked about economics being based in logic. Now that's going to be something that's going to come back to bite us a little bit, but that's what we're talking about. We're saying that all of the laws that we have, the principles that we are thinking about, the theories, they should all be based on logic. So we need to know that logic is about things being explained in a systematic way, that it's got a flow to it, that there are attempts to predict what's going to happen in the future. We use this idea of there being statements to illustrate the idea of logic, excuse me, where each statement is true, and then it makes the next statement true as well, right, as it goes through. When it's cloudy, it rains. If it is raining currently, there has to be clouds in the sky. Showing you that process, that logical, systematic process. And that's what we hope economics will be, because we're making this grand claim it's a science. Yeah? Okay. I don't know if you are subscribing to my YouTube channel.
Oh, we need to do that. What is it?
Well, you might have noticed that I pushed the video from the previous lesson into the classroom. Now, the school has now said that because the size of the videos, because of the distance learning, we're doing it relatively regularly, eats up quite a lot of memory, that the easiest way to push them into the cloud is to actually directly upload them to YouTube and then put the YouTube link into the classroom, so that YouTube holds onto it, and we don't. I'm not entirely sure how that works, to be perfectly fair, but that's the process that we're now thinking about. To be honest, I think I'm just putting it in two places at once, but you know, that's just me. Okay? So I have done that. So if you find that video, that will take you to the YouTube channel. And in the YouTube channel, there are some past videos from live lessons and various other bits and pieces. Obviously, the behavioral economics video is up there too. And so that's all there. And if you like and subscribe, that's all good. Okay. And refer to other people, right? And I was reading how to monetize such things, by the way, the other day. And apparently you need a minimum of 1,000 subscribers.
We can do that, guys.
Just saying. All right, and you need about 70 videos. So we haven't quite got to the 70 videos, but yeah. But I do have a large number sort of stacked in the computer, so I could possibly fire some of those up in there as well. Okay, so we will see. Right. We did that one. Don't need to do that again. Now, this is where we were with regards to the cause and effect idea. Okay, this is where I brought up that post hoc ergo propter hoc, where people make a logical error, where they make a mistake. They think that this effect has come about because of this cause, and quite often it's not. And we talked about William Stanley Jevons and the sunspot activity, and how the mistaken belief was that because of the different levels of electromagnetic radiation, it was going to have an effect on the economy. Right? What we now say is that there might be a relationship between those two variables, possibly, right? But it's not necessarily a direct cause. And we're going to find that a lot in economics. There's a lot of variables that we're going to discuss. And we're going to talk about interest rates and their effect on the economy. Yeah? But we need to be critical of some of that and start to say, well, maybe it won't happen that way that theory says. Maybe there's something else that will interfere with all of that. Good man. So Giraffe has subscribed. Good man. All right, I'm just going to turn the fans down because I'm looking at you and you seem to be all shivering. I'll turn the fans down. And now look at the north over here. It's what my mother used to say. I apologise, it's a very old person expression. It's also subtly maybe not appropriate. Right, now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be identifying variables we want to test. We're going to be creating hypotheses and trying to test them to see if we can figure out the cause and effect. The term that we introduced, whenever it was the other day, ceteris paribus. Yeah, that's how I pronounce it. You can pronounce it however you wish. And yes, in theory, in the exam, you could write CP. Yeah? Very obvious New Zealand joke there. I'm going to walk away from it. Okay. You could write just the initial CP as a code, an indicator as to what you're talking about. So when we do talk about some of our laws, we're going to use the idea of ceteris paribus to try and hold that law, that relationship together.
I found this on the web.
No, don't. Right? So there's ceteris paribus. If our assumption is to work, if our hypothesis is to work, we need to have certain key assumptions. Right? And those assumptions are where you're going to be able to be critical. Those assumptions are where we're going to say, well, in reality, maybe this doesn't work. And that's a significant thing for you to be able to do. That's that evaluation skill. Right? That's where we're now starting to hit. But we're also going to add an extra dimension because of the idea of behavioral economics, which is going to come up next week. Right? And this idea of a science that we take, a social science, and the experimentation, etc., that we might do, but does that give you an accurate representation of a cause and effect situation? All right? Or are we just making it up as we go along? All right. No? Are there any particular questions about ceteris paribus? Right. And yes, during my entire university, I don't think I spelled it right once. I don't think you need to worry too much about that. Yeah. Also, interestingly enough, I think if you were to go back to the original Latin, I would imagine, in my imaginingness, that it probably didn't start with the letter C. It actually probably started with the letter K. Right? Because those of you who are familiar with your Greek mythology, right, which is based on the sort of the Latin language, you're probably familiar with the idea that words that we now ascribe with the letter C, back then they were using the letter K, right, to describe those particular words. All right, can I move on? Yeah? Right. So the actual full explanation is there with regards to ceteris paribus, what it means. It is the Latin phrase for all other things being held constant, or all other things being equal. Now you can phrase that in many different ways so long as you've got the basic idea. All other things, right? Everything else kept outside of this relationship. Don't get between the variables. Very, very important, right? The example given was the same I used the other day about price and quantity demanded. And as we will learn in a couple of weeks' time, when we say in economics that when prices rise, the quantity demanded falls. But the only way we're able to hold that relationship to be true is if we have ceteris paribus in the background, protecting it from anything that might interfere. Yeah? Anybody seen American football? Yeah, used to be known as gridiron. We've kind of come away from that word now. I don't know quite why. But in gridiron, American football, one guy has the ball and he's running down to the end zone, and then there's the rest of his mates basically all trying to help him by pushing everybody else out the way. Yeah, so ensuring that relationship by keeping everything else out of the way. That was the metaphor I was going for. It kind of works. There was some good news, I believe, from the government last night about that they were going to allow student visas, yeah, for people who are overseas if they're on a student visa to come in. Right, so that might be quite helpful for some of our learners who are currently overseas. Okay. I don't know if that's new visas or if it's just they will allow them to come in if they've got an existing visa. That's something I don't know about. But that was a positive move, as opposed to just a blanket ban on everybody from those 23 countries. So what you need to be able to do is to talk about why ceteris paribus is important. What does it mean? Why it is important in economics. So the role that it plays in enabling us to come to the truth, all right, of the cause and effect between two variables. Cause and effect relationship between two variables. Yeah. That's what we're going to use it for. Very, very important. About the cause and effect relationship between two variables. And you'll notice I use the word truth there. Okay, yes, quite clearly. Okay. There's an element of about that, okay? Because what we're actually discussing is whether this works or not. So therefore, is it the truth or is it just not? Truth of the relationship, the cause and effect relationship between two variables. Allows us to come to the truth of the cause and effect relationship between two variables. And you can imagine your examiner now trying to compare economics to the physical sciences and saying, but in the physical science, when you do this, it has a cause and it has an effect. Yeah. Is that the same as in economics? No, it's really not. Okay. And that's an important thing to think. That although we call it a social science, it is, but it's not the same as the physical sciences, human sciences, physical sciences, natural sciences, whatever the terminology there is. Can I move on? Yes. Good. Now, here we go. Challenge. Fill in the gaps. So on your screen, there should be a close exercise, and what you're going to do is you're going to add the words from the bottom into the gaps. Just throw them in there. Now, I've done this a few times, and sometimes I've set them up so that the words are the same, which means that you could put them in the same gaps, but that's okay. So you put the gaps into words into the gaps. Oh, so you want yes. What does it now mean? No. All right, so what should happen is when you enter your information, it should all appear on the screen. When you hit go, your name and your score will appear. Yes, apologies for any spelling errors, they are entirely mine. Or grammatical errors. Yeah, you've got yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if the blue and the white, is that easy to see? Yeah, the Nearpod gives you a whole range of different fonts and colors that I could have used for it. I thought the blue and the white was all right, but just looking at it now, it might just be my eyes, but I actually find that quite difficult to read. So I might look at other colors at least. What have you done?
I press this one.
Yes, you're there. Yeah.
Okay.
That's the way you do. Yes. Well, yeah. So if you push done before you're done, it seems to lock the screen so that you can't make any more changes. So probably best to press done when you're done. Yes, absolutely. It's a very good point. Right. It's a really good point about how do you know? How do you know if you're ignoring the certain variables, if you're doing it correctly, you're measuring it correctly? Yes, absolutely. So you need to, the selection of the variables is going to be important, okay, for a start. And yes, you're going to build those variables off of your hypothesis. And yeah, absolutely. There's a very strong chance that whatever you do with regards to your calculation and your hypothesis, you might get your hypothesis wrong. Yeah, and that's part of what scientists do. Yeah, is they make a conjecture or hypothesis, and sometimes they get it right, other times wrong. Yes, certainly. All right. So I didn't want to scare you at this point, but I will. Wait there. I'm waiting another couple of slides on. Break out the big vocal. Yeah. All right. That's what I did. All right. And yeah, you can have a look. when you're here, and these guys can have a look. I did it a long, long time ago, possibly even before some of you were born, I don't know. And it, yeah, to be perfectly honest, what I proved at the end of this was that I was wrong. That doesn't mean this was not worth doing. It just means that my result was not proof that what I'd conjectured was real, happened. Yeah. So that, and that's what you do. Yeah. And for a lot of learners, that's a really hard thing to understand. So when you do something called an extended essay, which somebody has possibly mentioned to you, yes? Yes. I have a code for the extended essay. Do you know what the code is? EE. Because when you talk with students about it, they all go, EE! No? Yeah. Okay. When you do your EE, one of the things, particularly if you're doing an EE in economics, there is the strongest chance, or there is a chance, that you're going to prove yourself wrong. And that's okay, because that's what it is. That's what you're doing. You're testing. Yeah? You don't necessarily test to get the answer you think you're going to get. Otherwise, essentially, you are, what's the word? If you're basically setting up an experiment to get the result that you want to get, that's not a real test. Yeah, there's got to be an element of failure within it, and we're going to have a wee look at that. So if you want to look at the scary black book, you're welcome to. Now, nobody's score is coming up, so you're just not all pushing go. All right. That's what it should look like. Ceteris paribus is a Latin phrase that means all other things are equal and enables us to lock our experiments to a limited number of variables to ensure that we can reliably test the hypothesis presented. Yeah, it took me, because this is in the days when computers were relatively new. All right, so the spell checking alone took me over 2 hours to do. Okay, the maths that you see in there, you will see the smallest part of that in your IB course, not that level, okay? Don't panic, all right? And I did need help myself with the maths in there. Okay? I couldn't just instantly do it, yeah? But then I did a paper on how to do that maths, and yeah, all sorts of scariness ensued. All right. Now, to remember, when we do this for economics, we are talking about the, where is it, economic world, not necessarily the real world. And I know there's possibly some of us who go, oh, yeah, but that's what it is. We've got to create a hypothetical environment in which to test these variables, this hypothesis that we will create, this theory, okay, but it will be so different from the real world that it might even be completely unrecognizable. And that's a mental leap that some learners really struggle with. Right? There's a section of the course where we're dealing with business structures, and we talk about some of the business structures, and we say, are there any examples of this in real life? And we say, no. Because that section is so purely theoretical that we don't have any real life examples. And that's something that you might find in economics when we go through, here's a theory, where's a real life example? There aren't any. Yeah? Because it's just too difficult to do. Right. We can also talk, in your textbook sometimes talk about this, economic actors. We're not talking about it's old terminology. It goes all the way back to like Adam Smith. Okay. We're not talking like some sort of drama that you watch on television. The economic actors from Grey's Anatomy. Is that even a show still?
Yeah, it's like, it's not like,
All of a sudden, I thought you wouldn't understand that reference.
yeah, I feel it.
Criminal Minds. Yeah. Yeah. Now. So what we need, yeah, pop culture reference, do you spot it? Is empirical evidence. What does it mean to have empirical evidence? Aren't scientists in the room? Come on, empirical evidence. What are we talking about? Okay. Talking about the real world in as such as we have created it. Yeah? So it will provide us with real information, empirically proving what we set out to prove. Now, what you are going to discover, and I hope I'm not shattering any of your illusions already, but what you're going to discover is that, remember microeconomics, yeah, the study of the individual, the firm, yeah? Well, we've got theories about that, yeah? And we test those and we try and find empirical evidence about those. Then you've got to understand that we then scale it up to macroeconomics. And we're dealing with an entire economy. And we're doing the same thing. We're trying to come up with hypotheses, theories, make cause and effect analysis, but on that scale. Yeah, it almost becomes humorous when you consider the difference between the reality and what we're actually going to be discussing. Because the scale is just that big, right, when you're looking at the macroeconomic environment. Right? You might be talking about the inflation rate for an entire country. Well, consider the number of variables that we have to exclude. And in case you're wondering, that's what that is. Okay? Dealing with the inflation rate of New Zealand, okay, in comparison to the unemployment rate of New Zealand over a certain period of time. Trying to measure the relationship between those two variables to see if a theoretical hypothesis that was put out in England a long time before then would actually apply also in New Zealand. Turns out, no. Right? But tested it. Yeah. Also, the thing you have to understand, just like science, is that we repeat test things. So it may not work one day, but then the next day, might work. Yeah? Do you see that idea? Right? You might think gravity isn't working today, so then you try it again tomorrow, and lo and behold, it works. Yeah? Yeah.
Is that empirical evidence us comparing the world to on what?
Yeah, the empirical evidence is based on the constrained world we create. Yes. So there will be aspects of the real world that we aren't considering at all. Right? It's either that we haven't considered them because we may not even know them. Yeah, there's a chance of that. We just don't know. Yeah. Or it might be that we do know them, but we've chosen just to ignore them because we're ceteris paribusing, you like. We've got to protect this relationship that we've got. Okay. Yeah, and it is a little bit of, again, you're proving something that in reality may not actually work. Yeah? But if you were to ask your physicist about these sorts of things, anybody taking physics, yeah? Have you discussed the difference between Newtonian mechanics and quantum mechanics? Yeah?
First lesson.
What happens? Yeah, okay. what happens when you introduce weird outside events? What happens when, I mean, Pete's sake, scientists still can't figure out light. Yeah? That it behaves sometimes like an individual particle, and other times it behaves like a wave. Yes, I remember that because I had a, did I tell you the kid I used to sit next to in school?
No.
He was bright, woo, really bright. He just, you know, Yinsen bright, yeah? And he used to sit there and explain all these things to me. We'd be sitting in maths, I wouldn't learn any of the maths, okay? But he would be explaining all sorts of life, the universe and everything, things to me. And I would then go home and try and explain to mum and dad, and they'd just look at me, all right? Which is fine, okay? And he was the one who encouraged me to read Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time. Okay? Yeah. I had to read it about 4 times, because the first time I read it was just like, whoosh, yeah? So I read it a few more times over the years to try and pick different bits out. It's not an easy book to read, okay? A better book to read is by a physicist, a female physicist called Kitty Ferguson. Dr. Kitty Ferguson. She wrote a book called The Fire in the Equations. That explains some of the quantum weirdnesses much better, I think, than The Brief History of Time. Because she's using the Brief History of Time book to write her book. Yeah? So, right? Just as students might use my theory in my book to then try and apply the same theory somewhere else. Yeah, well, it didn't work in New Zealand. Maybe it works in Malaysia. Maybe. I haven't checked. Yeah. All right. Now, oh yes, down the bottom here. In economics, when we do experimentationing, one of the things that we might use is a little bit of math magic. You don't have to worry about that. When you get to university and you're doing economics, chances are you still won't have to worry about it. Depends which university you go, what do you, yeah. When you do postgraduate, then you need to start worrying about it. Okay? It has a cool name, econometrics. It is quite literally the maths of economics. And there are bits of it in the scary black book. Okay? I used to have, because we traveled around the world, we got rid of a lot of our books as we went, because they're heavy. Yeah? But when I was teaching, I kept my econometrics textbook, one of them. Because it was big, it was scary, it had all these numbers and equations in it. And because it was New Zealand, if the kids were misbehaving, right, you need to copy out this book. Page 1, go. They learned pretty quick that they didn't want to do that again. Yeah. So I found that probably more amusing than they did. It was a scary book. I did econometrics a couple of times because I did it undergrad in order to do preparation for the postgrad, and then I did it obviously in postgrad as well. It still terrifies me, to be perfectly honest. Econometrics does. Statisticians, anybody do stats? One. They don't? Regression analysis. A lot of econometrics is about regression analysis, because what you're doing is you're finding data points and then you're trying to see how close they fit to your theory. All right? And you'll have lots of data points, and so you need to figure out a line of best fit and see how close they get to this particular line, and there's the mathematical equations that relate to all of that. That's what a lot of it is. Yeah. Of course, I did it at university in New Zealand with New Zealand lecturers who weren't necessarily is interested in us passing. All right, good old Bob. I will remember him for the rest of my day. All right. There were only 3 of us who passed that particular year. Me, Sam, and Catherine. We were the only ones who passed. Okay. Catherine helped me pass. I would never have passed without Catherine. We did a little study session together. She was very bright. All right, very bright. We did a study session together, and she said, "Let's answer this question." I said, "Nah, we're never going to be asked that in the exam." No. So she said, "No, let's just do this. Yeah, let's just do this question." Yeah. Sure enough, that question was in the exam. And if she hadn't gone through it with me, yeah, I wouldn't have passed. All right. So, and I would have had to have repeated it the next year. Okay. So, very pleased about that one. Yeah. So I could tell you, I won't tell you anymore. Right. Econometrics, the math magic is what we're going to use. It's like a regression analysis type idea. It's gathering up this empirical evidence, but you don't necessarily see that, okay, until you get to the higher levels in university, when then you are asked to do it. Now, my mate Sam, who I mentioned before, he did econometrics as well with me, but when he wrote his PhD, he wrote it on sports and economics, and he had to use this regression analysis tool, and he had to basically create his own equations and theories and hypotheses, right, using the econometrics. And it was so complicated that the person supervising his PhD, he had to explain the maths to them. Yeah, that's how complicated it was, right? So yeah, you can get quite heavy with that. It's also why there's a philosophy in economics, and it was mentioned, somebody mentioned Austrian economics. Yeah, the Austrian economists worried that we were straying too far into mathematical speak and maths and economics, and we are losing the behavioral part of economics. Right? They were very keen on that it's a human science, we should be dealing with people, right? And one of their quotes was that people are not human calculators, because you're not, right? You're not standing there trying to work out all of the formulas before you make your economic decision. You just make it, yeah? And we're going to see a little bit of that. Okay, empirical evidence. It's the empire. Okay. Star Wars, right, give you a bit of background. Star Wars is literally a space opera. That's where it came from. Yeah? Right? So they were wanting basically a space opera. And the basic idea behind it was cowboys in space. Yeah? That's where that came from in the 1970s. All right? And they made subtle changes to it as they went. Here we go. Is it possible to ever get to the truth of a statement about the real world using empirical testing? Can we ever be truly certain? Gosh, that's a TOK thing. Go. Well, I don't know that it's the same font. It probably just looks like it. They all look very similar. Yeah. Yeah, it was a real fun time, though, writing that. We had a lot of laughs. We really did. There was a whole group of us. We were all doing different theses together. We were working at university. That's when I decided I wanted to be a teacher, because I was teaching undergrads. economics, yeah? And they'd turn up to me the day before the exam saying, I don't understand. And I'd say, what don't you understand? And they'd say economics. Right? I was having battles with, because the social work students had to take economics. So I was having those discussions with them about the difference between economics and social work. I was having learners who were very maths or social leaning, right? Taking economics, we had lots of those sorts of discussions, and it was really fun, and I loved it, right? And we used to have lectures at, I don't know, 8 o'clock in the morning, and the university students would turn up and they'd be all half asleep. Fun, lots of fun. Can we ever be truly certain? Yes, absolutely. Gosh, you must be fun in TOK lessons, gotta say. Yeah, you're right. Yeah? Right. Yeah. Yes. Yes, and empirically you would need to repeat the test again and again and again to make sure. You would need to eliminate any outside variables, yeah? Right, Nisa might be controlling it with her mind, I don't know. Yeah, she has that ability. Yeah, yeah, and then of course you say, well, it works, fantastic, brilliant, and then you try it somewhere else and it doesn't work. Yeah, so what then? Or somebody, say Kendrick, then decides to repeat your experiment and he gets a different result. Yeah, so what then? So this is what has happened, and this is why you end up with what's called a paradigm shift quite often, right? Why you've got the clash between the classical economists and the Keynesian economists, why you've got the marginal revolutions occurring, right? And in other sciences as well. Yeah, the world is round, it is not flat. Yeah. Okay, this is why these things happen, because you test, and you test what you know, but can you ever know? If you repeatedly test it, you might find an answer that matches what you come up with, but you might equally find not. Repeated testing, finding actual numbers, information.
Oh.
Yeah, it's the testing process. Yeah, but also for economics, we've got another big problem. Okay, what do you think? Why is it with empirical testing in economics you might struggle? It's the same reason people are worried about things like the Big Bang Theory. How do you test the Big Bang Theory? Yeah? So therefore, yes, sciences, empirical evidence, right? Goodness. Oh, yeah. What grade did you get? That's a good question.
It's not probable, but it's
Pass. I don't know that it was a brilliant grade. I mean, I ended up with, they do it, I don't remember now.
yes, but
They do it in classes and then
yes,
grades or something like that. Yeah.
Probability is zero.
I think it was second class, but honours, something like that.
It's actually yeah. You can just ignore it.
Right. Okay. Now we will move on. Who's Tim? Tim. Okay. Fair enough. Yes, good. The problem that we're going to see with economics is that because we're going to discuss macro concepts, that finding empirical evidence for macro concepts is going to be very difficult. Testing macro concepts is going to be very difficult. So how do you prove them? How do you find the truth of them? Right, I'm going to move on. We seem to be stalling a bit with that one. That's all right. Right, terminology is part of this, and we use often the word theory. And we might say, in theory, this happens, or this is the theory of. So we need to know what a theory is. It's a general explanation, as opposed to the sergeant major explanation. Yeah. Only Tim got that one. Yeah. So that's what it is. You've got the relationship. You're going to say this is how the relationship works. It's a theory. Now in America, they debate whether something is a theory or something is a fact. Okay. All right. So we do have to be quite clear about it. General explanation of the relationship. Sometimes there's a hypothesis involved, maybe more than one, but other times not. It's quite literally just a theory. It doesn't have to have been tested. If it's a hypothesis, because that's the point, you test the hypothesis. But the actual hypothesis itself hasn't necessarily been tested. And why do we use theories? Because they're a really good way of trying to explain complicated relationships. Yeah? Which is you, when you're at home with mum and dad and you're trying to explain your significant other in your life. Yeah? You might have a theory about that. Explaining a complicated relationship. Right? In the 1970s and 1980s, there was a pop culture television show called The Love Boat. It was, yeah, really not good. Okay, but it served a good purpose in New Zealand because I would use it as a staging point for a joke. Where I would talk about the love boat being a relationship.
Oh, wow.
And yes, I do remember the name of the character who was the main character of the Love Boat. His name was Captain Stubing. That guy. Which is an odd thing to remember, but that's right. Theories are a good way to explain something, particularly something that's quite complicated. Now, I have a 7-year-old who asks an awful lot of complicated questions. An awful lot of complicated questions. Did I say an awful lot of complicated questions? An awful lot of complicated questions. Okay. Sorry?
Give us examples of the
Oh, lots and lots and lots of them. He saw there were some YouTube videos which were who would win in a fight between. So he had launched into a whole series of those with regards to different Marvel characters, and then wants me to answer. Yeah? Okay. Have a go. Yeah. All right. Now, but wait, like all good infomercials, there's more. One of the examples of theories that you will actually cover has already been mentioned because we talked about it a little bit, and well, you talked about it in your one of your presentations, utility theory. Is that you? Yeah. Utility theory is a theory. There will be a law that will potentially be connected to it. And it is all about why you consume certain goods and services. Now, the plan is that we will do an experiment to test this. All right? That's the plan. Now, I thought we'd be further along, but then we added complicated extra days, etc., into the week. So my plan now is to do an experiment next Friday, dependent on how we go up until that point. Okay, because we need to do a couple more things before then. So that is my new plan, is next Friday, this time next week, we're going to do the experiment. It will be different from how I've done it before because we'll need to do it socially distanced. But we can work that out. That will be okay. All right, sorry? Maybe. All right. And I'll need people's help with it. We'll be introducing the idea of utility into that particular conversation. And part of that will involve you thinking critically about the theory. And you will need to discuss what we did, what did it tell us, and then you will need to then say, well, is that actually true or not, and why? That will be part of what we do. But as said, the plan is for that to be Friday, this time next week. Okay. In essence, this particular theory is all about why you buy certain products and not others, and why you buy certain amounts of certain products and not others. There is some HL content involved with that, and that's useful for us to start getting into, because we need to also know how you will cope with HL-based material. We also have an economics laws. Now, in the 1980s in New Zealand, there was a politician called Michael Laws. So I used to use that as a joke. Famous ones, like the Michael Laws. Yeah. See where that one works. Yeah. This idea here is that we should be using the theory, we should be repeatedly testing the theory, and we should have tested it enough that we can say without shadow of a doubt, it is the law. All right? It happens, and it's going to happen. Right? So the gravity idea, even though gravity, I believe, is still a theory. Or is it a law? I don't know. You guys are the science people. Yeah. Theory. All right. Now, we're going to have a lot of laws. I say a lot. There's about 5 or 6. Which is going to sound like quite a lot, I guess. All right. They're going to be slightly different to the laws that you are used to, like, I don't know, the speeding laws, etc. They're going to be laws that will involve understanding the theory behind them, and they will involve some terminology that you'll have to understand too. Why do we use a law? Because, again, we're attempting to explain events. And this will then be able to give us something that we haven't had before, the ability to predict the future. Theory. And one of the laws is, yeah, it's mentioned there that you will cover in the not too distant future, and it is the law of demand. But you don't need to worry about it. You don't need to consider how difficult it is. It's not going to be too demanding. Right. Yeah, that one's it. Right. Ariane. I'm still trying to work out how to say your name. Ariane. I worked out Big Sister's name pretty quick, but I'm struggling a bit with yours. Yeah, Ariane. Right. I think I'm going to use you as my guide point with regards to jokes. All right, I think that's so. If I see you laugh, then I will know jokes on the mark. All right, because the last few times you haven't laughed. You don't have to. I'm making a joke about making jokes. Yeah. Oh, meta. It's like we're inside a movie. Right. Law of demand. Now, laws are weird. They are. Just as a way to speak and think about things. Right? And the ability to predict the future. But sometimes people forget that they're there. Right? Sometimes laws have been around for so long that people just kind of take them for granted and ignore them. And particularly if you're looking at behavioural-based laws that, you know, the courts and governments set up, they just kind of forget that they're there. So one example I've got for you, hopefully it's there, is this one. In this particular town, you're not allowed to fly and land your UFO in the vineyards by law. Nope. Not allowed. It's in France land. So some people might be familiar with the place. It is in a place that I'm probably never going to be able to pronounce. All right. Apparently there are vineyards there, and you're not allowed to land your UFOs there.
You made the law at the beginning.
Right. Okay. Apparently the law has been there for a long time, and they just leave it there. And if you do look, there are some other weird ones around the world. There was one about you're not allowed to tie your giraffe to the street lamp. In California, there was one about you're not allowed to peel your orange in the hallway of a hotel.
What? Yeah, something like that happened.
So there are some quite unusual ones. Yeah. All right. And in economics, we use models. You've already seen and experienced the PPF, so you will be familiar with such things. Yeah, there might be a slight joke there.
That's a good one.
Right. Now, your models in this particular case are going to be where we physically represent the theory or the hypothesis in like a diagrammatic form. Right. I mean, when we looked at the PPF model, we have looked at the PPF model, haven't we?
Yes.
Yes. When we looked at the, sort of some thought. Right, when we looked at the PPF model, one of the things I said to you is that, you know, maybe in the future when you're doing your PhD, you could be researching into it being 3D. You know, I've said that many, many years. Nobody has yet done it. Okay. So, right, we use the assumptions, we use the theories, we use the laws, and we build the models to match those. And again, it's all about explaining, and it's all about predicting. Right? Knowing how to explain the model, but also how to use it to say what might happen in the future. Because the model told us. And again, sometimes it's going to be next to impossible to use empirical evidence to prove that even though this is what the model says, this is what will happen, but we still try nonetheless. You joining us via remote as well, Wenhao? Okay, good man. All right. Okay. You want to say hi? Yes.
Hi. My name is Karma.
Ta-da.
I'm 16 years old.
My name is TikToker. Follow me on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube.
And I like to keep TikTokers.
Like TikTok.
So, yes, you will. If you haven't met Fatima before, you will. Okay.
You can't avoid
Growing social media influencer, who I'm sure you will run into from time to time. All right. Now, so we're going to use, and again, you can imagine you've got the link now between these ideas, and where the examiner could ask, how do economists use models? How do economists use models to further get to the truth? You know, these sorts of ideas. Or it could be a TOK-based discussion as well about the use of models in economics and whether that is appropriate or not. In the past, it was about whether economics is a real science as opposed to a social science, and then you would discuss all of these ideas. Right? That still can be asked because it's a social science, and that's still part of the syllabus. Am I able to move on?
Yes.
Good. Ta-da. Some models have more information in them than others. Some models are purely descriptive. One such model is the PPF, which you've looked at already, where the model in and of itself is supposed to explain the concepts. Others are going to need a little bit more work, and you are going to need to do a little bit more explaining behind them. Just going to say that. Now, because we're going to have a number of theories, a number of laws, which will be different obviously from the theories, okay? We will have some hypotheses that we can create, but it will be on every single topic that we cover. Yeah? Right the way through year 13. So you are going to be experiencing lots of models. All right, and you can see Donald Trump's reaction to such things.
Oh, now I get it.
Yeah. Blue. Okay. All right. Not going to go there. All right. All right. You're going to have lots of models. There are going to be a large number of diagrams. It is not something to be nervous about or worried about. It is just what it is. You will work your way through them. There will be some opportunity for you to pick and choose between different models. Again, no Donald Trump jokes there at all. We're going to stop the lesson there for the day. We've got a little bit more to do, which we're going to work on again into the new week, and that will be our bridge into behavioural economics. Otherwise, as we'd say, end of my birthday, goodbye for now. Hold on a second. Thank you. Bye.